In the previous episode, we talked about the events that led to the rise and fall of the Braguins. In this episode, we will head east and talk about the Pozitianians and the events that led to their downfall. The Pozitianians were a group of humans that valued learning and exploration and followed Eastern Bitocism. The tribe that awakened were those of Pozitianian, who were led by a group of wise men, individuals who had different specialties such as warriors, philosophers, and they were also the masters of religion and traders. The first action of Pozitiania was to form the Army of Peace, 5,000 strong, and immediately declare war on their sister tribe in Obrona Craba. The leaders of Obrona sent diplomats to the newly formed United Holy Kingdoms, asking for assistance, which was given, and the UHK began to mobilize. With the threat of major conflict brewing, the wise men decided to negotiate and ask for a meeting. The UHK agreed, as did those in Obrona. The wise men had also asked the neighboring tribes of Zatoka and Lodowick to join, intending on settling peace and forming a unified state, but were told to fuck off. The meeting didn't get off to a great start, with the idea of any union between their two peoples being vehemently refused. Those in Obrona would accept peace, but refused any idea of unification until the Pozitianians had proven themselves to be less treacherous and warlike. Through some rounds of negotiation, they eventually agreed to a military alliance with the possibility of unification later on. With the alliance formed, the wise men continued to train the Army of Peace to liberate territories and unite the Pozitianian people. They soon went to the leaders of Zatoka and offered the same unification. The Zatokan leaders agreed if, and only if, Pozitiania helped them take over Umgeben. Despite their vaunted army of peace, which had been training all the while, the wise men waffled, trying to gain the union before the war against Umgeben, and seemed wholly uninterested in conflict. This eventually infuriated the Zatokans, who walked away disgusted, leaving the wise men to declare, "That is it. We will take it ourselves, and you will beg us to join the Union." However, they never would declare that war. The next big event would come some years later when the UHK invited Lodowick to join their kingdoms. The wise men were obviously angered and demanded the UHK back off from culturally Pozitianian lands. The UHK declined and pressed forward, even as the wise men made a fuss about their diplomat having been there for weeks and should have been seen first. Lodowick, having been embroiled in intrigue over murdered diplomats with the crabs to the south, had actually been about to contact the UHK for protection. They claimed the crabs killed one of their diplomats, and the crabs insisted it was the other way around. The UHK, desiring the vassalization of Lodowick, gave some assurances of religion and getting reparation from the crabs, and the matter was settled for now. Though it wouldn't last long, as the ensuing court case they held between Lodowick and the crabs showed the duplicitous nature of Lodowick, and they were kicked out of the kingdoms. The wise men wouldn't capitalize on this, and would end up remaining idle until the events that precipitated their downfall. But, while they idled away, others weren't so passive. The Ferdonic people were your standard, traditional, agrarian society that fiercely valued their independence. While the original tribe to awaken were the Ferdunks to the south, will focus a few years later when the tribe of Umgeben had awoken. After awakening, they were attacked by Zatoka, who were looking to expand their own borders. The conflict was brief, the Zatokans having vastly underestimated the army of Umgeben, and were quickly pushed back and defeated. Buoyed by this success, they expanded their army to 30,000 and declared war on the Hellenes to the north. However, their aggressiveness would spell their doom as others looked to capitalize on these events. Finally, the Penoxi, hard-working people who were focused on the betterment of their settlements and revered the tallest of mountains, carving their homes into the cliff and mountainsides. Living in such a rocky area, their first action after awakening was to expand southwards to the Twin Lakes, both to secure arable land for farming and to start communicating with the other tribes, sending diplomats to Murrel, Etelendre, and Sepsolar. While they waited, they formed the Penoxi Guard of 3,000. Once the meeting had started, the elder of Penoxi warned the other tribes of a vision he had, horseback men riding into the valley, the mountains, and slaughtering the Penoxi people. The nation dead and bare. The other tribes were concerned about the rising Draconids and Orcs to the west and agreed to form the Penoxi Defense Pact. These grim tidings seemed even more prophetic when the Orcs to the west started raiding the nearby tribe of Puskava. leading the elder to request that the Penoxian tribes prepare for war. When the raids turned to full-scale conflict, it was only with the aid of their neighbors to the north that Piscava was able to push back the Draconids. Taking this as a sign, the elder called a meeting of the other chiefs to discuss the prospect of unification to guard against these aggressive nations. Those in Sept Solar, being closest to the nations in the west, agreed heartily. The others, fearing being left behind, the visions of destruction, and the threats of religious incursion from the east, all soon agreed to form the United Nation of Artoix Lie. With the unification, they began expanding to the east, to the borders of the Susans and Helens, before going south to the Fredonic League. Their military was also expanded to 10,000 and split into 3 armies, the Greve, the Mur, and the Montag. And a large mountainside mausoleum to the faith was to be constructed, preserving the best and brightest in intricate stone sarcophagi. It was during this period of rapid expansion and development that they heard about the conquest of the Helens by the Umgeben, and sent envoys to the Helens, offering aid in the coming conflict as long as they were able to get the lion's share of the Umgeben lands to the sea, and expanded their army to 20,000. They also sent diplomats to the Fredonic League, promising an alliance if they would join in on this war, which was also accepted. And so now the war was Artoix Lie, Helens, and the Fredonic League against Umgeben. Seeing the war developing on 2 fronts, Carus, the leader of Umgeben, split his army in 2, sending half to fight Artoix Lie and the other half to fight the Fredonics. But it was at this point that the Free Zatoka movement arose, with 10,000 warriors ready to take back their homeland. Seeing the situation rapidly deteriorating, Carus sent missives to all nearby nations calling for aid, but it wouldn't be enough. While the army was still preparing to divide, the combined forces crashed down on them and shattered the nation. With the war over, the leaders of Artois met with the newly freed Zatokans and the Helens and offered them protection, promising local freedoms as part of their larger nation. The Helens refused and saw the offer to help them unite as meddling, believing that any attempt to do so would ruin the chance at a unified nation. The Zatoka agreed, with the understanding that they'd help them unite the Pozitianian people. Artois agreed and declared war on the Pozitianian Union. The war was almost a disappointing affair, as a single Artois army overcame the Army of Peace and sent them packing. The result of these wars was Zatoka becoming a client state of the Artois, cementing their power in the region until the sharks surrounding them struck.